PlayStation just put a countdown clock on physical games. Starting in January 2028, Sony says physical game disc production for all new games releasing on PlayStation consoles will be discontinued. That is the part that matters. This does not mean your current discs vanish. It does not mean every PlayStation game you already own stops working. It does not mean stores close tomorrow. Games that already released on disc, or games that released before that cutoff in disc format, are not the target of this announcement. But after that line, new PlayStation releases move into a different world. They will be available through the PlayStation Store, and they can still show up at retailers, but only in digital formats. In normal player language, that means the box on the shelf stops being a playable physical object. It becomes a way to sell a code, and that changes what buying a game means, because a disc is not only plastic. For a lot of players, a disc is resale value. It is a gift you can wrap. It is a copy you can lend to a friend. It is a game you can trade toward the next release. It is something a collector can put on a shelf. It is something a parent can hand from one kid to another. It is something a player can buy used when the digital store is still charging too much. That is why this story exploded so fast. The headline is about PlayStation ending physical discs for new games. But the deeper story is about control. When the disc disappears, the PlayStation Store becomes more important. Retailers lose one of their strongest reasons to bring players into a store. Used games slowly lose future supply. Collectors lose the default physical version. Families lose a simple way to share. And players who wait for discounts lose one more price pressure point outside the official storefront. That does not mean Sony is doing something random. The cold business reason is clear. The market already moved. Recent PlayStation sales tracking shows digital purchases now make up the overwhelming majority of full game software sales. One recent quarter was reported at 85% digital, with physical down to 15%. If you are Sony, that number tells you the future is already here. Physical is no longer the main way most people buy games. But that is exactly the tension. The majority moved digital, but the minority still used physical for reasons that mattered. And when a platform holder removes the option completely for new releases, the conversation is no longer only about preference. It becomes a question of what players lose when the market stops offering a choice. That is why today's video is not going to be a simple physical good, digital bad rant. Digital has real advantages. Preloads are convenient. Remote downloads are convenient. No disk swapping is convenient. Many players already buy everything digitally and will barely feel the change at first. But physical discs did something digital licenses usually do not do. They gave players a second economy. A disc could leave one household and enter another. It could become store credit. It could sit on a shelf for 10 years. It could be found in a bargain bin. It could keep a local shop alive because people came in to trade one game and left with another. So the real question is not only why Sony is ending discs. The real question is what happens when the last pressure valve outside the digital storefront starts closing. The first thing to keep clear is the boundary. January 2028 is not the date every physical PlayStation game dies. It is the cutoff for new physical disc production. That difference matters because panic makes this story less useful. If you already have a physical library, the announcement does not erase it. If a game releases before the cutoff in disc format, that physical version is not suddenly deleted. The change is about what new PlayStation releases look like after that point. Imagine walking into a store in 2029 for the newest major PlayStation release. Under this future, you may still see a product card, a retail box, or a branded display. But the thing inside is not a disc you can install, lend, resell, or collect in the old way. It is a digital path back to your account. That small shift changes a lot of normal habits. A parent who used to buy one disc and let siblings share it across rooms now has to think about accounts, licenses, and access rules. A player who used to finish a game and trade it toward the next one no longer has the same option for new releases. A collector who loved building a shelf of the generation now has a hard stopping point. A player with slow internet or data caps has fewer ways around giant downloads. A gift buyer loses the simplicity of handing someone a finished physical copy. and retailers lose more than a product. This is where the supporting story becomes important. Retailers have already started reacting, and some of that reaction is not just nostalgia. It is business math. Physical games create store visits. A player brings in a trade. While they are there, they look at accessories. They buy a controller. They pick up a gift card. They ask about a console. They browse used games. They talk to the person behind the counter. The disc is not only the item being sold, it is the anchor that brings the customer into the room. If the newest PlayStation releases no longer have discs, that retail cycle weakens. A code in a box does not create the same used market. Once the code is redeemed, there is nothing to trade. There is no second owner. There is no used copy moving through the local store. There is no bargain bin full of last year's biggest releases. The product becomes a one-time digital license. That is why the reaction from physical-focused retailers matters. It turns the story from a platform policy into a local economy issue. For a huge chain, maybe that means restructuring. For an independent shop, it may mean losing one of the reasons new customers walk in. For a player who depends on used games to stretch a budget, it may mean fewer options over time. For a collector, it means the future physical library starts to freeze. And this is also why GTA 6 matters as a comparison. Rockstar already pushed the code and box conversation into the mainstream. When the biggest entertainment launch in the world ships a physical product without a disc, players get a preview of what this future looks like. The box still exists. The shelf space still exists. The brand still exists. But ownership feels different. The PlayStation announcement takes that feeling and turns it into a platform direction. That is the real shift. Not no boxes, not no retailers, not no games. It is no new playable discs after the cutoff. And once that line is drawn, every future purchase has to be judged by a new question. Am I buying a game I control, or am I buying access through a store account? Now, to be fair, Sony can point to the numbers. If roughly 85% of recent full game software purchases are digital, then the business case becomes hard to ignore. Physical games require manufacturing. They require shipping. They require warehouse space. They require retail coordination. They create inventory risk. They share value with stores. And they support used sales that do not send new money back to the platform or publisher. Digital cuts through almost all of that. A digital sale can happen instantly. It can be pushed through the PlayStation Store. It can be discounted on Sony's schedule. It can be preloaded before launch. It can live in the account library. And for the majority of players who already prefer digital, that is not a downgrade. It is just how they already play. That is the strongest defense of Sony. The company is not forcing a behavior that came out of nowhere. It is following a behavior millions of players already created. Players voted with convenience. Players bought digital. Players downloaded. Players preloaded. Players accepted huge patches. Players stopped visiting stores as much. Players filled libraries with licenses instead of shelves with cases. Over time, that becomes the market. So if Sony looks at the data and says physical disc production no longer matches how most of the community buys and plays, that is not unbelievable. But the issue is that a market trend and a platform mandate are not the same thing. There is a difference between most players choosing digital and the platform deciding that future new releases will be digital only. Choice lets different types of players exist at the same time. Digital buyers get convenience. Physical buyers get resale and collection value. Retailers get stock. Families get gifting and lending. Preservation fans get something tangible. Budget players get used copies. The store still exists, but it has competition from the shelf. When the disc disappears, the competition changes. The PlayStation Store becomes the center of the economy for new releases. That does not automatically mean prices go up. It does not mean every sale gets worse. It does not mean Sony will instantly abuse the position, but it does mean one major form of outside price pressure weakens. Used games pressure prices. Retail clearance pressures prices. Borrowing pressures purchases. Trading pressures the value of buying at full price. A physical copy creates movement outside the platform, holders direct control. A digital license does not move the same way. That is the real ownership concern. It is not only whether you can play the game today. It is what power you have after the purchase. Can you sell it? Can you lend it? Can you preserve it? Can you use it without the store being involved? Can a second household benefit from your first purchase? Can a small retailer build a local economy around it? For digital-only players, those questions may not matter much. For physical buyers, they are the entire point. And that is why the reaction is so emotional. Collectors see a timeline. Retail workers see a business model weakening. Preservation communities see another step toward account-locked libraries. Parents see less sharing flexibility. Discount hunters see fewer physical markdowns. And players who remember old digital store shutdown debates hear the same warning bell again. That is also why Nintendo becomes part of the conversation. If Nintendo keeps physical game cards as a major part of its ecosystem, it becomes the contrast. Not because Nintendo is perfect, and not because every Nintendo release is preservation-friendly, but because the physical option itself becomes a differentiator. PlayStation is choosing the digital future more directly. Xbox has already leaned heavily digital in many ways. Personal computer gaming made the shift years ago through Steam. So the question becomes whether PlayStation is leading the console market forward or simply admitting where console gaming was already going. The answer is probably both. The important thing now is not to overstate the story. This does not erase your old discs. This does not mean every store shuts down in 2028. This does not prove Xbox and Nintendo will follow the same timeline tomorrow. This does not guarantee PlayStation store prices will be worse forever. And this does not mean every player has to change their behavior immediately, but it does create a clear countdown. Current PlayStation owners can keep using the physical games they already own. Physical buyers have time to decide what they want to collect before the cutoff. Retailers have time to adapt, protest, or shift their business model. Digital buyers can mostly keep doing what they already do, but everyone now knows where Sony is aiming. That clarity matters. If you are a collector, the shelf has a future endpoint for new PlayStation releases. If you trade games, the future supply of new trade and titles starts shrinking after the cutoff. If you wait for discounts, you may become more dependent on digital sales controlled through the storefront. If you are a parent, gifting and sharing may become more account-based. If you have slow internet or data caps, new releases become harder to manage. If you run a local game store, you have to rethink what brings people through the door. And if you are thinking about PlayStation 6, you now have to factor in the software future, not just the hardware specs. That is the part people should not miss. A console is not only a box that runs games, it is an ecosystem for buying, keeping, sharing, and revisiting games. Sony is not just changing packaging, it is changing the shape of that ecosystem. The strongest defense is that the ecosystem already changed. Most players went digital. The entertainment world moved digital. The personal computer market moved digital. Movies and music moved digital. Game file sizes grew. Day one patches became normal. Discs became less complete over time. The old physical model was already under pressure. But the strongest criticism is that physical still protected something important. It protected the idea that a game could exist outside one storefront. Not perfectly, not forever, not in every case, but enough to matter. Enough for used games to exist. Enough for local stores to survive. Enough for a parent to hand a game to a child. Enough for a collector to preserve part of a generation. Enough for players to feel like there was still one path that did not depend entirely on a digital account. That path is now on a timer for new PlayStation releases. And that is the final answer. Sony is ending physical discs because the market already moved digital, and the business case for manufacturing, shipping, and supporting discs is getting weaker every year. From Sony's perspective, the data supports the move. But from the player side, this is still a major loss of optionality, not because every player used discs, because the option gave players leverage. It gave retailers relevance. It gave used games a future. It gave collectors a version of ownership they could actually hold. So, the story is not that PlayStation killed your current library overnight. That would be too dramatic, and it would be wrong. The real story is that Sony just put a date on the end of new physical PlayStation games. And once that date arrives, the question for everyday players becomes much bigger than where you buy the next game. The question becomes how much control you still have after you buy it. That is the kind of story GamingRealm is built to explain, not only the headline, but the system behind the headline. The broader game plan by Dylon ecosystem is built around that same idea. Take messy information, organize it, and turn it into a clear story about what is actually changing. And with PlayStation discs, what is changing is simple. The game is not disappearing. The choice is choice.